right. Thanks for everyone joining us today. We're here on a Gimmal webinar entitled OmniRIM Replacement, How to Choose a New Vendor. I'm Dean Gonzalski. I'm not Tim Butler. I'm the Vanna White to Tim Butler there. So I'm the gentleman on the right. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Gimmal. Just started in the last month or so. And so happy to be here. First webinar that I'm helping moderate. So Tim, you can tell me if I'm doing an okay job or not later as we go. We'll hit a few housekeeping items. Well, Tim, go ahead and tell us about yourself. See, I'm already going too fast. You got to tell us
all right, yeah,
why we should listen to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. So guys, for those of you not familiar with these webinars, or myself in particular, I've been at this physical records management, which of course OmniRIM has been a part of, going on about 25 years now. So I know hopefully just a little bit in the position now of solution architect here at Gimmal.
Great. Thanks, Tim. And we'll obviously hear from you more throughout the session today. But in terms of housekeeping items, probably the most important one, I won't read all these, is please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A platform, and we will get to them throughout if we can, and certainly at the end, time permitting. And the rest, we will get you a recording in case folks want to look at the content later. And then please let us know if there's anything technically going wrong, but I assume nothing will deter us today as we jump into the content. I'll just sort of kick this off with sort of a super high level about information governance generally, and then in a second or two about Gimmal specifically. I think that the main challenge with information governance is, as the scale indicates here, is to balance the risk with the value. You see organizations historically have kept information around in vast quantities, first terabytes, now petabytes, and have hoped to harness that information with AI and other technologies down the road. In reality, many companies are finding that it's not that easy to leverage huge amounts of user generated data. And in fact, if you're really going to do that, you have to have curated data lakes and things of that nature. And all the while, there is the risk and costs associated with all that data, and that really has escalated in the last decade or so. We now have an assume breach sort of posture with cyber hacking incidents, and so companies who haven't been breached need to be prepared that a breach is likely to hit them, or is maybe in fact underway already. And from a legal and regulatory perspective, you've got all the data privacy regulations, the new one in California, CPRA, GDPR, other state ones that occur out there, New York cyber regs. And so the risk at the end of the day, we probably should have this animated, Tim, maybe for next time, is the risk will be very quickly outweighing the value for most organizations. And so that leads us to, what Gimmal does. This is our raison d'etre. We focus on all aspects of information governance, everything from the discovering and mapping, visualizing, assessing your information, typically in unstructured but some structured sources, all the way into migrating, classifying, tagging, coding, retaining, disposing of information ultimately. And so we've got a full suite of solutions that we've had for a number of years that work together and can help you with all your information governance challenges. And the physical element on that chevron to the lower right is what we're going to talk about in a second. And when I first joined Gimmal, I wasn't sure if we actually had physical records that we were managing bankers' boxes, but Tim will shed some light onto the meaning of Gimmal physical as we talk about the OmniRIM end of life and their product.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Dean, for getting us started there, guys. And has already been mentioned, As is typical of these webinars, a little bit unfortunately, right, just based upon the time constraints and the technology, you're really going to be listening to us talk, but we do want to invite and encourage you as best you're able to provide input, and in the context of the webinar, that will be via the chat. So please, 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 any comments, positive or negative, or questions that arise during the course of the webinar, please enter those into the webinar chat. As time allows at the end, we will address as many of those as we possibly can. You're seeing on the screen now, guys, right, the quick outline of the webinar, really just 4 topics we're going to cover. And I'll tell you right up front, we're going to fly through the first 3. We want to spend the meat, so to speak, of the webinar on topic 4. I think the stuff that'll be in particular will be most helpful to you. But we'll quickly look at OmniRIM history. We'll pivot then to just how broad their footprint was. We'll spend a couple minutes on what we've kind of colloquially here called transitions, but really the more common lingo here would be what the heck happened, and you'll see what I mean when we get there. And then we'll spend the majority there on number 4, the key considerations. So with that, let's jump in. Let's talk about OmniRIM history itself. Guys, OmniRIM, as a lot of you will know, right, they date back to the mid-1990s, roughly coinciding when I started in this industry. And back in the day, right, this is actually, for those of you old enough, this is shortly before the advent of Google. So had you actually gone on the internet and had you used Yahoo to search for something like physical records management software, back in the mid-90s, when you did that, you would have actually had in your result set dozens of combos of providers/products. Right? There was just a lot of paper, a lot of activity, a lot of management of those records that was in demand. And so hence a lot of providers offering their services and products to meet that demand. So that is what OmniRIM came into. Again, for those of you that have been around long enough, you'll recognize some of these names. But back in the day, there were the combos of like MDY's FileSurf product. There was Triad's Gain product. There was AccuTrack. There was Infolinks. There was Hummingbird Autonomy, Stellent, MasterTrack, Tower's Trim product, which became known as HP Trim, and then HP Records Manager, and into the future, and many, many others. So it was a very crowded market space that OmniRIM was launched into. But guys, within a very short period of time, really from the mid-90s to right around the turn of the century, it's really not an exaggeration to say that in terms of OmniRIM, they came, they saw, and to some extent, they conquered. Guys, they were spearheaded by a particular individual, very dynamic, very knowledgeable, a great salesman, very plugged into the industry, who was, and in all caps, guys, he was very good at what he did. Now, I'm not really aware that there's ever been any kind of Gartner type reports that have focused exclusively on physical records management. But if there had been, or if there was, I think it's probably a fair statement that you would have seen OmniRIM in their heyday. You would have seen them at the very top. And maybe you might even say they were the leading provider. If not, they were at least a major player in the physical records management space. All right, so they were very successful. Let's talk for just a moment about their overall footprint, right? How broadly was OmniRIM utilized within the market itself? And in a word, really, it was just everywhere, right? They were across all verticals, and you can see them listed here, so both public and private sector. They were a Canadian company, so as you would guess, they did very well in the Canadian public sector, but also in the US and elsewhere as well. In the private sector, they particularly did well within the life sciences or the pharmaceuticals, really extensive footprint there. Close behind, I think, they were in financial services, energy, oil and gas, utilities as well. And although it's not really listed here, there were other segments, including healthcare, that they also did really well in. All right. So very quick background about where OmniRIM was and how successful they were. We want to just move it forward to what we've called transitions, or as I mentioned up front, well, what the heck happened? Why was such a successful, meteorically rising company? What was their demise? Here's a quick summary, guys. So I remember this actually in 2010. I worked for Infolinks back in those days. And in 2010, I remember being significantly surprised when I heard actually that Archive Systems was acquiring OmniRIM. competed against OmniRIM all the time. They were a worthy competitor out there in most of the opportunities that we were in. So very surprised to see that this was happening. And you know, guys, in the end, there's really two types of acquisitions, just to oversimplify just a little bit. There's acquisitions that are really centered around acquiring those additional customers, the client base. There's a focus on puffing up the revenues, the financial sheets, increasing the ARR, if you will. And who knows for sure, but in hindsight, it sort of looks like that's what happened with Archive Systems acquiring OmniRIM. When they did that, of course, they got that whole client base, which was very extensive at that point in time. But really just a few years later, in the upper right, as you'll see there in 2015, Access Information Systems, large information management company, acquired Archive Systems in its entirety, including the OmniRIM portion, of course, right? And that's what Access Information does. They've acquired dozens and dozens of providers or companies over the years, and this was just one more that they got a hold of. Now, for reasons I don't fully understand, but another 5 years went forward, Access decided to divest themselves of the remnants now of what OmniRIM was. And really, guys, in 2020, as soon as FileTrail, and most of you are aware of this, pretty much as soon as they acquired the remnants of OmniRIM, it was announced the end of life or the sunsetting. So really, starting in about 2010, which in a lot of ways was the peak of the OmniRIM system, that slow and steady decline began up until 2015, where it really just became precipitous. They just fell off the cliff. I rarely saw them anymore, to the state of affairs where we are today. And now in the lower right, 2022, this year, end of life for OmniRIM. So one of the big questions here, right, guys, is okay, what happens next, right? And that's our little 2023 here. Nobody knows for sure, right? But we do know one thing for sure, right? That come 2023, you do not want to be in an unsupported piece of software, and in particular within the OmniRIM system. So time is increasingly becoming of the essence here. All right, now to the meat, so to speak, of the webinar itself. And just to pause here for a second, guys, to summarize, right? OmniRIM was a top shelf product, did a really good job, very wide installation base. But guys, they are no more. They are not coming back. And so the question really now becomes, all right, I don't like it, but I've got to do something. What should I do? And guys, that's where we're hoping to really provide some benefit to you here. We want to get really detailed here for just a few moments to help you kind of ascertain what kind of questions should you be asking, what topics should you be focusing on as you consider the selection of a new vendor. To that end, guys, we really have on just two slides here, two substantive slides remaining in the webinar for you to focus your attention. Number one, level of experience. Guys, I think this goes without saying, but anytime you're purchasing software, this should be key. It should be a high priority on your list. So recall how I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, right? Back in the 90s, you could go out there using Yahoo and search, and you would find dozens of providers offering physical records management services and software. I think most of you are aware, guys, that is not the case anymore. Things have changed dramatically. I do this pretty regularly. If you haven't done it, I would encourage you to do it here as soon as the webinar is done, right? But if you do it today, and probably using Google, of course, rather than Yahoo, whereas there used to be dozens of these providers, guys, really now it's only a handful. And really, practically speaking, you can count them on one hand. There's just not that many left. I actually found it a little bit fascinating when I recently did this, that in the results sets that Google returned to me, some of the top results were actually links to document management providers. Yeah, a little bit and somewhat related, but really an entirely different discipline than records management, and certainly different than physical records management. So they're just kind of bogus hits. They shouldn't even really be in those result sets. There's others that you will see there listed that yes, they do have a physical records management capability, but for those providers, it's really just an add-on or an afterthought or a plug-in. It's really not the focus of what they do, which is usually content management, but you'll see some of those in the list. As I mentioned just a moment ago, there's really just a small number that's still focused, that are still really experts in the discipline of physical records management. So don't be fooled as you evaluate these vendors. You want to find out from their level of experience how much of that experience is really focused on the physical records management. As a quick aside, guys, still under this level of experience topic, can't prove this to you, of course, but it is my perception that the amount of paper hard copy records in the world today, there's actually more than there's ever been. Now, it certainly is true, without question, that the rate of growth has significantly diminished over the years. But I still think there's more paper hard copy records being created than being destroyed. Whether or not that's exactly true, it's suffice it to say there is a lot of paper records still being managed. Now, guys, the focus, another quick point to make here, the focus certainly has changed. Back in the 90s, the early 2000s, the focus was upon the management of active file-based records, whereas now the focus has shifted for the most part to inactive files in boxes that are stored in warehouses. So there is certainly change within the industry, but there's still a lot of paper records out there. Back to the topic of level of experience, though, guys, in addition to just the vendor themselves, what is their product pedigree? How long has their physical records management product been around? Is it a Johnny-come-lately to the market, or does it have decades of experience seeing really all the different possibilities out there concerning the management of records themselves? And then at a little more granular level of detail, guys, we should spend just a moment. In addition to their overall experience, you want to ask some very specific questions concerning your particular industry or vertical, right? So in the public sector, for example, into which OmniRIM had a very broad footprint, right? For those of you in that vertical, you will know that there's a nuance within public physical records management. Really, there's a multiple level hierarchy that needs to be supported and facilitated, and you can leverage that. So you want to ask questions specific to your industry in terms of their experience. Or if you're in the life sciences, pharmaceutical, the vendors that you look at, how much experience do they really have beyond just core physical records management, helping the life science or the pharmaceutical customers work themselves through that validation process, or being compliant with 21 CFR? Or for those of you coming from the financial sector, right? Really, that financial sector is from which the sort of the gold standard of data privacy security standards called SOC 2 Type 2, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Out of that sector, how much experience do they have working with that highly sensitive data that you find in your vertical? Or if any of you are coming from oil and gas, right, just the myriad of item or object types that are tracked within that industry. Do they not only have experience, but do they have experience specific to the nuances of your particular vertical? Guys, drilling down just one level, in addition to just the vendor as a whole, you really want to query about their personnel, right? Because in the end, these vendors are made up of people, and you want to be asking questions like, how experienced are your personnel? Not just with software, not just with records management, but specific to physical records management. Do they have decades of experience, or is it somewhat less? And then sort of wrapped into all of that, you'll often have vendors who are very good at software, but they don't know the first thing, right, about records management. Gimmal is certainly a software company, but lots of expertise surrounding records management itself. Guys, there's actually some really specific questions that you can ask. I'm going to say,
I was gonna hit the one real quick, Tim, just for maybe my edification as well.
Yeah.
You talk about data migration. How complex is it to get off of the OmniRIM system? And I'm sure your mileage may vary is part of the answer, but is that, days, weeks, months, years, how difficult of a transition, and maybe how long should people plan for that transition to occur?
Yeah, great comment, question. Thanks, Dean. And the good news there, it depends upon the experience of the vendor. Gimmal, for example, very experienced in migrating OmniRIM folks. So you're really looking at a matter of weeks. If there is a slowdown, it will be on the client side via paperwork and IT and things like that. It's basically a push button process almost here within Gimmal to push you through the process. But it's a good segue, Dean, actually into topic number 2. And here's where we'll spend most of the rest of our time before we close out with the last 4 points. Guys, the thoroughness of the data migration is super important, right? To simplify a little bit, in the end, whether you're speaking OmniRIM or Gimmal Physical or any of the other products that are out there, they are really just tools to manage your data, right? Data is king. Your OmniRIM data, which lives in a SQL Server database, in all likelihood is going to move to a SQL Server database managed by another provider. And the questions you want to be asking, and pertinent to the comment questions Dean just asked, you've kind of got a big fork in the road, guys. If you've been with OmniRIM for a long time, which I think a lot of you probably have, and you're really happy with what it provided, you might want to take the approach specific to data migration now of telling your new vendor, look, I just want to do a lift and shift. I don't need all new fancy bells and whistles. I'm happy with what it provided. Can you just replicate this, please? And that certainly is a viable strategy, and the right situations could be exactly what you want to do. But guys, I don't want you to miss your opportunity, right? Most of the OmniRIM systems that are out there have been out there for a while. They're a little aged now, and things have changed. It is your opportunity to introduce some new database architecture, which results in new features and functions that should be available to you. So be aware of the lift and shift, or also maybe just making your database architecture a little bit more contemporary. All right, looking at time, guys, seeing it's flying by, I'm going to move to number 3, quality of support. I think it goes without saying here, guys, but we'll just kind of reference it here. When it comes to that, make sure you ask these questions with the quality of support. For those of you in OmniRIM, this should be a particularly poignant issue for you, right? As is typical of products that have changed hands a number of times. The quality of support degrades pretty rapidly. And probably most of you in this webinar can say, yep, Tim, I hear you're preaching to the choir on that one. Well, guys, ask that question moving forward. Ask those detailed questions, right? So make sure, press your vendor for references, right? And check with those references. How are these guys? Don't limit yourself to what the vendor tells you, of course, right? Ping your colleagues in the industry. Ask their experiences. What's your experience been like with this vendor? How good are they? How responsive are they? How quick are their fixes and the like? Another quick little tidbit, guys, right? If the vendor you're evaluating, if their SLAs are not publicly available to you, that should be a red flag, right? That should be obvious, something you can go on the web, pull it right up, so you know going in what to expect in terms of the level of support that they will provide. And then one more quick point under quality of support, guys. In addition to just the vendor as a whole, ask who it is that actually provides, what kind of people are providing that support. Are they employees of the vendor, or is it a third-party situation, remote or offsite? So keep all that in mind. And then quickly, guys, the last 3 points we'll cover here with the small number of minutes we have available to us. Number 4, functionality comparison, right? I think this goes without saying. OmniRIM, guys, really was sort of a top shelf product. They had a lot of good functionality. But again, things have changed. So at a minimum, you should be expecting, sort of comparing apples to apples, to be looking for a product that offers at least what OmniRIM had. But then certainly look to those vendors to offer more and additional features and functions that have been introduced in the ensuing years.
Tim, I know you're going fast, but what would something like that be? What would be, I assume they stopped developing before end of lifing their solution. What's come around the last few years that might be a new feature for somebody to consider?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dean. There's a couple in particular. So one of them is end-of-life disposition. The availability, the features and functions surrounding that pretty labor-intensive process of physical records management disposition. OmniRIM did a respectable job at it, but things have improved over the years. Look for improvements there. The second big one would probably be OmniRIM, like most of the providers back then focused almost exclusively on physical records management. The integrations and capabilities, guys, with electronic records management being unified, a lot deeper integrations now. So be asking those questions. As you all are aware, one day, right, physical records are going to go away, and that's certainly the direction the industry is moving in. But that day is not today. But you want to take those baby steps, so to speak, into the management of not just physical, but also electronic. Point number 5 here, guys, total cost of ownership. Really 2 quick points to make here. You can learn a lot from your potential vendor in terms of the pricing that they offer you, right? How eager are they for your business? That should be reflected in the pricing that they offer. And then, guys, really big point here, and I think all of you will be aware of this, but I'll just emphasize it anyway. Guys, if you are not in the cloud within a short or a few number of years, you are going to be a dinosaur. It's just the way the world, the industry is going. So as you look for your new vendor, as you're migrating from what is likely an on-prem OmniRIM instance, take that opportunity not just to upgrade your software, but also to upgrade your technology stack by moving to the cloud. In the long run, guys, you can usually provide a pretty convincing case that from an overall cost of ownership, the TCO, it's less expensive for your organization to move to the cloud than it is to stay on-prem. And then finally, guys, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention here, in addition to all these vendor-focused considerations, don't forget the internal ramifications, right? I think we can summarize all this by saying change is hard, right? We know it. Change is hard, and it's especially hard when it's forced upon us. So make your end users aware, guys. Not that I like it, but change is coming. And to that end, invite their input now. Get them on board so that they're ready to go with you as you make this change from your older OmniRIM system into one of the newer contemporary solutions provided by today's vendors. Last point I'll make, guys, really important point in terms of data security. Really, I should have put this under point 5, but as you do move to the cloud or hopefully move to the cloud, make sure that your provider has a SOC 2 Type 2 certification. That is the gold standard nowadays. So don't forget to ask about that as well. So as always, guys, with that, I appreciate your time today. I know it's just a few minutes and we moved at a very rapid pace. We do have a single poll question here. And with this, I'll turn it back over to Dean to facilitate that and to field any questions that came up.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. And I know we went quickly, so appreciate it. Lots of content jammed in here. So I thought it was good. We have a couple questions. So obviously, feel free to answer the poll if you want more information about what Gimmal can do for you. We can contact you thereafter. One thing that I think is interesting, because you mentioned they're a Canadian company and Gimmal is based here in the US. How do we handle data in Canada or in other North American regions or, throughout the world?
Yeah, great question, Dean. So guys, Gimmal utilizes the Microsoft Azure platform for our technology stack and for data storage. And as you're probably aware, Azure has data centers across the globe. They do have data centers, they're up to 2 now within Canada, where your data, if you are a Canadian company, all of your data will remain in Canada. We've got clients in Canada utilizing that right now.
Great. And I think we might have time for one more question. Let's see what's come in. This one's interesting. We talked about, there was one about how long does that migration take? What about validation assistance? What is that? I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, I guess so. Any of you within the life sciences pharmaceutical sector, you of course will know what that is. And for those of you not, because of the regulatory burden, mostly from the FDA, whether you're in the States or elsewhere, they are sticklers in terms of documentation. So when you do implement a new piece of software that has anything to do with the manufacture or the testing of the products that pharmas provide, you need to do what's known as validating that product, a very document-intensive process. Guys, good news there from the Gimmal perspective. We've helped many pharmaceuticals through that validation process. We can actually give you a huge head start. So if you're in that sector, please follow up with one of us afterwards. We'll be glad to give you additional detail.
All right. I think you you nailed it right there at exactly 30 minutes, Tim. So let's wrap it up. And we appreciate everyone jumping on the call today. And if you requested any information, we will follow up and we'll also send the deck around. So thanks, and hope to see you soon on another webinar. Thanks,
Thanks,
Tim.
everyone. Yep, thanks.